Two children walked through a garden. A little boy and girl, presumably siblings, admired the flowers lined up against the gate. The girl, Caron, particularly loved the flowers, and her brother picked one for her. He told her that it suited her perfectly as he put it in her hair. But the little girl looked down. When her brother asked what was wrong, Caron asked if the flower got hurt when he picked it. The little boy smiled helplessly. He should have known that Caron would get worried, but he reassured her it was fine. He smiled, knowing Caron was growing into a kind girl. The boy, Sato, was now a lot older, and he received a hard slap from a girl. She cried, asking him who was more important, her or his little sister. Sato apologized and tried explaining that his parents asked him to watch his little sister, and he would make up for it next time. But the girl was done. That was Sato's precious life. He thought deep down his family cared about each other at least. He checked his phone to see messages from his parents. But since they were always busy and away with work, it was him who needed to take care of his sickly little sister. He would force-feed her vegetables and sit by her bed almost like a little parent himself. When Sato returned, his sister was already on the couch, cozied up. Sato told her he would make a start on dinner, and his sister also requested a cup of tea that he would make for her especially. When Sato looked up, he noticed his sister playing the same game she always did. She explained that this time she was on another character's journey, but she squealed when it came to the battle scene, asking her brother to take over. Sato told her not to dump the hard parts on him, but she pleaded for some help. When Sato came over, he noticed that his sister had developed a fever. He told her to go and get some proper rest, but his sister begged him to let her play for a little while longer. Sato eventually gave in, taking hold of the controller while his sister lay down on the couch. Sato asked if the hero Sion and Saint Kazara were a classic pairing. His sister agreed as the game flashed alive. He also mentioned that the drill-haired character was amazing. His sister asked if he was talking about Villainess Caroline. Sato explained that he liked Caroline's character development, how she was just an unloved, unfortunate character with a tragic ending. His sister laughed, telling Sato that after she gets a boyfriend, she will no longer be the center of his life. But Sato scolded her for saying silly things. He added that he would plan to scare off any boyfriend she brings home. His sister laughed brightly, telling him that was definitely something he would do. To outsiders, they might look like siblings, maybe slightly too attached. Or it might seem like Sato doted on her a little too much. But soon his sister was sick in hospital, him by her side until the very last minute. His sister apologized for causing him so much trouble, and she thanked him for always being there. But to Sato, his sister could never be a burden. His eyes filled with tears as she took her last breath. Sato heard his name, that his parents had finally come, but this time they were in the emergency room because of a car accident. He was told that they were rushing to get to his sister's side before it was too late. After losing his sister and his parents all at once, Sato started avoiding deep relationships. He was too scared to lose someone close again. He was applauded at work but afterwards invited to a drinking party. Of course, Sato made an excuse that there was still some work he needed to do, but his work colleague practically dragged him out for a night. At the bar, the work group engaged in conversations about their home life, showing pictures of their kids and family. Sato was asked if he had a girlfriend, and he blurted that his last girlfriend was back in college days. To his surprise, he was introduced to a woman who supposedly said that she found Sato nice. The woman insisted that he take her on a date, just to try it out. Sato quickly realized the reason why he was invited out, and he shut the conversation down fast. He told the woman that he was not looking for anything romantic right now, and that there were better men out there for her. On his way back, he exhaled deeply. He knew that he was fine with being alone. He decided to grab something from the convenience store and make his way home. At the crossing, the green man appeared, and Sato made his way across the road when suddenly he was knocked off his feet. The last thing he thought was that it was probably a good thing he turned that lady down, because Sato was now reborn as a baby. He took it as his karma for his harsh rejection. He kicked his feet, looking around the ginormous room that was his nursery. A voice called him Zechs, which turned out to be a maid ready to feed him his bottle. It was then that Sato, or now Zechs, realized these people were a completely different style than he was used to. He wondered how he ended up in this situation. At least the maids were still speaking Japanese. Another maid joined to take care of him. She ushered him to drink up, and Zechs quickly discovered that his mother was not part of the picture. The maids laughed, calling him a creepy baby for being so quiet and serious. Not to mention he had white hair. Zechs was far from impressed. Not only did he have colorless white hair, but he was also ignored aside from being fed and bathed. He was pretty sure he read something once about how they raised babies like this in medieval days, and most of them died before they turned 1. But Zechs knew he was a 27-year-old adult inside. He knew that it would be better if no one got too close to him, as he never wanted to lose someone important again. He knew the easiest way to prevent that would be by not getting close to anyone in the first place. The maids commented on how cute another baby was, Zechs' little sister. Zechs looked up and could not believe it. He did not want a sister, or at least he did not want to lose anyone ever again. He heard a woman's voice cry how big he had gotten, and he soon learned it was his mother. She cooed over him, tying an oversized bow into his hair. Zechs really had to deal with these people as his new parents. His little sister began to cry, and it was seriously loud. Her name was Caroline, and she was the polar opposite of Zechs, super noisy and animated. As soon as the going got tough, his parents headed out for some tea, leaving Zechs and his sister all alone. He rushed to the door, surprised that they cared so little. When he chased after them, they flatly asked him what was wrong. He had just eaten and gone to the toilet, so his maids thought they could leave him all by himself. Zechs sighed and turned to his sister's crib as she cried and cried. He knew that he was not about to get involved with this baby. But there was not much around that was stimulating for an adult mind. Only juvenile picture books and toys. Eventually, Zechs gave up and turned to his little sister. He waved a rattle around her face and she instantly stopped crying. Zechs smiled, seeing her reaction turn into a smile. He put the rattle in her small hands, but moments later she threw it at his head. Zechs learned his lesson: leave his sister be. But the crying got worse and worse, and Zechs did not know if he could ignore it for much longer. He looked at the clock, realizing that the maids were late for milk time. So he walked towards the door and knocked. There was no answer, so he pressed his ear to the door to hear what was going on. The maids complained how Zechs was being difficult again before discussing how he should be fine just playing with his toys on his own. Zechs sighed, super frustrated that no one was listening. He reached up to try and grab the door handle, but he was still too short. So he decided to do a run-up, jumping to open the door. He fell back, but it worked. The maid gasped as Zechs ordered her to get some milk for Caroline. Baby Zechs was standing on business. So thanks to her brother, Caroline was fed. Of course, the maid tried to leave as soon as the bottle was empty, but Zechs barked at the maid to now change Caroline's diaper. By the time he had finished giving orders, his little sister was one happy baby. Zechs tried not to fall for the cuteness, telling himself he only stepped in because her crying was getting super annoying. He told himself that today was a one-off. But after a while, Zechs knew he needed to keep this little baby entertained. So he cooed over her cot. Time passed quickly, and soon Caroline was sitting up all by herself. Zechs applauded her and she handed him a toy. Zechs smiled and thanked her, feeling super wholesome with his little sister. But he knew he needed to stop himself getting too attached to her. For the time being, it was okay, especially since there was not much else to do in the nursery. Caroline crawled over to Zechs, passing him the toy. He wondered how many times he needed to pass it back to her until she was satisfied. As Caroline rested, Zechs noticed that she was beginning to get a temperature. He began to panic, wondering if she was getting sick. So he rushed to the door, knocking as he always does. Zechs told the maids that she might be ill and they should move Caroline away. The maids told him they could not without the master's approval, but they could fetch a doctor. Zechs opened the door and demanded they move his bed and Caroline's as far as possible. He bossily told the staff to hurry up. It was then that the maids chuckled at how Zechs spoke just like a fully grown adult despite only being one. They continued to suspect that he was cursed. The maids went into the nursery and began to change the sleeping arrangements. Zechs knew that he messed up by dropping the baby act, but he felt himself gradually feel worse. His head was pounding and he began to sweat. He could not remember the last time he had a fever. He remembered his sister and everything she went through. Memories of his sister crying. Zechs suddenly sat up to see his sister. He told her that she could not come near him if he was contagious. But Caroline was wailing for his attention. She would not give in, and she began to cry, "Oni-sama." Zechs knew that it was the first time Caroline had called him that, and he really thought he was reluctantly taking care of her. Suddenly, Caroline fell from her crib, and Zechs ran to the rescue. He caught her in both his arms, and Caroline looked up to him, delighted to see her brother. Zechs smiled weakly, pleased to see that his sister was okay. But soon after, he collapsed back in pain. Caroline cooed his name before she flopped over and cuddled him on the ground. She kicked her feet out of content and soon fell asleep. Zechs woke up, confused as to why he was on the floor. Did he seriously pass out? He noticed that his fever had passed anyway. But where was Caroline? Zechs turned to see her lying sweetly on the floor next to him. Zechs looked at her, unsure of what to think. He did not know if Caroline had stayed with him because she was worried about him. Eventually, her eyes opened and Zechs wished her a good morning. She called for her big brother, a huge smile on her face. Zechs wondered if all of this really was in his head. He promised himself he would never let anyone into his heart again. But maybe that was impossible. He pulled Caroline in for a hug, telling her he was her big brother, and he was finally proud to have a precious little sister. The years flew by quickly, and Zechs and Caroline were both small children now. They picked out a book from the shelf, choosing a large one that covered the country's history. Zechs read the story to her, making it as entertaining as possible. The book contained the characters Sion and St. Kazara. Zechs frowned, sarcastically saying it was classic fairy tale material. Caroline looked up to him in confusion, but he told her it was nothing. He turned to Caroline, putting the pieces together. What if this world was the same world that featured in the game he used to play? And his sister? Her golden hair and crimson eyes. Could it be true that she was Caroline? Zechs' mind flashed back to him playing the video game on the coach. He tried to win the battles for his sister's sake. The more the captured targets interacted with Caroline, the more possible routes there were, so maybe Orca's route had the highest chance. He fretted and questioned the game all night until his sister flicked the light on. She asked if he had been gaming all night, explaining she woke up from her sleep. She smiled, asking her brother if he was really into the game now. He agreed, but he instructed her to go back to sleep. His sister wished him good night, but Zechs continued to play. He became obsessed, hoping for a survival route for Caroline. And then maybe Nanami would not have to leave halfway either. Zechs searched endlessly for a solution, but in the end, no such route existed, and his sister died anyway. His heart suddenly dropped as he looked at Caroline. The little girl he grew to love deeply was destined to die. Caroline kissed his cheek and ruffled his hair, but tears were already streaming down Zechs' face. He desperately wiped them, knowing that he was not going to let this life end that way. If this was before the game's story began, then there still was time to change what happened. He told Caroline to leave it to him, as she sensed he was upset. He reassured her that he was fine, pulling her in for a hug. He knew that he was going to protect Caroline no matter what it took. She did not have to die. That day, Zechs decided to sit down and map out the situation properly. He had been reincarnated into the world of an action RPG-style romance simulation game he played in his past life. It was called Record of Heroes and Saints, East and West. He was now the mob characters, and of course the older brother of the villainous Caroline. It was a game where the protagonist changed based on the gender you chose. So if you chose a male character, you would be a hero. If you chose a female, you would be a saint. The game allowed you to meet various characters and build bonds throughout your experience. The original story had 3 parts. Firstly was the academy life, secondly a grand adventure to reseal the demon king whose seal was weakening, and finally the individual routes based on the capture target you secured. Zechs knew that most of the game's weight was in the academy arc, however, and that Caroline only appeared in the female protagonist's route. From the moment she first appeared in the Academy arc, her personality was her major flaw: spoiled, jealous, and arrogant. She was worlds apart from the picture-perfect and pure heroine. Confused by jealousy over the heroine, who was always surrounded by others, Caroline tried various schemes to get her way. But each time, the heroine's capture targets would step in, boosting her reputation even further in the Academy. Naturally, Caroline could not tolerate it, and soon enough she worked with demons who also hated the saint. This led to her tragic ending. As Zechs brainstormed everything he could remember, Caroline tugged at his sleeve in a bid for his attention. Zechs turned as Caroline proudly showed him some art she had been working on. Random scribbles, for that matter. He smiled, telling her that she did a great job. He patted her head as Caroline smiled, but he knew he needed to think. What could he do to avoid Caroline's horrible fate? He paced up and down the hallway. Simple logic said that as long as she did not go down the same path, she would be fine. So if she did not grow up to be a jealous or unpleasant person, there would be no reason for her to clash with the saint in the first place. The maids could be seen from the shadows, pointing at Zechs, who was wandering around like he owned the place. It suddenly clicked that Caroline became a villainess because she never received love from her parents, and even the servants treated her coldly. He began to walk down the stairs, piecing together that it could have actually been the lack of parental love that caused Caroline's downfall. In fact, the only time Zechs met his parents was when Caron was first brought here. If that was the case, then Caron probably could not even recognize her parents. So of course she was off to a bad start. Zechs knew that he first needed to try and contact their parents. He approached the butler in his office and asked him about the 2 people who brought him into this world. The butler explained that the only thing he could do would be to leave a message for the master and madam, and Zechs soon understood that his parents did not even live in the same household as their kids. He really was doomed. Who actually lived in separate houses from their own children? To make matters worse, 3 months had passed and there was still no sign of their parents. Caroline cried to Zechs, telling him she needed to pee. She could not hold it in, so Zechs took her and they sprinted to the bathroom. Fortunately, they made it just in time. Zechs helped his sister until he heard some strange voices. He looked down from the banister to see none other than his parents. The butler spotted Zechs dangling from the banister and told him to come down. He could hear his parents asking about the tea, completely ignoring their estranged son who was right in front of them. It seemed like they were rather half-hearted parents, considering their tea party was more important than being reunited with their kids. Caroline asked Zechs what was wrong, and he said everything was fine, just that their own parents had not noticed them. But to his surprise, Caroline did not even understand the concept of parents, and Zechs sat her down to explain. He used her toys as an example and told her that Daddy Bunny and Mommy Bunny had Baby Bunny, their child. He went on to say that Mommy and Daddy are the 2 people who hug you and stay by your side. He asked Caroline if she understood, and she nodded. But then, to his horror, she pointed to him, calling him both her mommy and daddy combined. Zechs forced a smile, gently telling his little sister that he was going to the bathroom. But the truth was that he was on his way to arrange for his parents to meet Caroline properly. His parents were deep in discussion over tea and cake. Zechs listened in on them, expressing how much they did not want to interact with their children. They did not want their clothes ruined or to get a headache from their whining. They asked the butler to do whatever was needed to keep them out of the way. When Zechs returned to the nursery, Caroline welcomed him back. He pulled out a book and they began to read before eating dinner together. After their evening was done, they got tucked up in bed. Zechs cuddled Caroline to sleep, knowing that he could love her more than both their parents combined. The next day, the siblings went to play in the garden. Caroline saw a butterfly and asked what it was. Zechs explained, telling her they gathered around the flowers that the gardener took care of. He pointed to the gardener, who asked Zechs what brought him there. But to the gardener's surprise, Caroline bowed and thanked him, presumably for the lovely garden. Zechs smiled, knowing his plan was working. Caroline was growing into a kind girl with a heart that was gentle and filled with love. There was no way she would ever meet the fate of death. But Zechs knew he could not let his guard down. She was only 2 years old now, but there was still a chance for her personality to change with time. And since this world mirrored the game so closely, there might be some force trying to steer her toward the same fate. He watched over Caroline chasing the butterflies, knowing that he would protect his adorable little sister no matter what. Caroline rushed over, telling him to hold out his hand. Zechs played with her, but he knew that he needed to be strong too if he was going to change his sister's life. Every morning, Zechs got out of bed early to begin training. He heard that building muscles too young was not ideal, however. So for now, he would begin with running and stretching, training his body appropriately for his age and learning martial arts skills, of course. Zechs ran around the house before he reached the kitchen. He watched the chef create a firewall out of his own hands. In this world, magic had attributes, and it showed in your hair and eye color. The chef, for example, had red hair and eyes. He caught Zechs observing him and asked what the young master was doing loitering in the servants' quarters. Zechs explained that he was thirsty, so the chefs grabbed him some water, or rather a water orb that another chef had spun up above Zechs' head. The chef laughed, noticing Zechs mesmerized by the magic. Unfortunately for Zechs, he was colorless. His white hair meant that he had no attribute. Everyone was born with a magic power. Their attribute manifested when they brought it forth. People like Zechs could not materialize magic as a result. Therefore, no attribute users had no unique magic. Zechs took the water and told them he would return the cup. When he left, the chefs discussed how a colorless heir was not fit to be the head of the house. But perhaps his sister could fill the seat when the time came. The chefs smiled, knowing that if Caroline could wield the same light magic as the saint, the master and madam would be overjoyed. But one thing they could not wrap their heads around was why her parents neglected her. Any child with saint's light magic would make her parents proud, undoing any shame they had for a colorless son. Zechs sighed as he heard the entire debate. He soon realized he was the failure in this story. But he could not give up. There was still something he could contribute to. Zechs made his way back into the children's room where Caron had fallen asleep. Zechs encouraged her to take a proper nap since she was sleepy. He took the opportunity to get some more training in. He decided to attempt body reinforcement. As the name suggests, it was the technique of channeling magic to specific body parts to give them strength. Zechs remembered reading that anyone could use it, so attributeless users were not powerless after all. Zechs made a plan to master body reinforcement first, and then drill magic control into his body. He held out his hand, but it immediately splattered with blood. Truth was, this spell was not widely used. If you misjudged the output, you could run the risk of injuring yourself. Zechs took a breath, knowing he was not about to give up like that. He had no choice. He needed to master this to protect his sister. Meanwhile, Caron began to stir. She woke up to find that her big brother had disappeared. But the door opened, and it was Zechs. Caron ran into his arms. She immediately noticed his hand, and he explained that he hurt it while practicing magic. Caron looked truly disturbed to see her brother hurt, and Zechs apologized for scaring her. He knew that he needed to be more careful in the future to not upset Caroline, so he suggested they sit down and read a book instead. Caron and Zechs sat in bed reading a fairy tale book. As usual, he tried his best to be as animated as possible, but the words of the book took him by surprise. It read, "The elder of the forest said, if you wish for your dreams to be fulfilled, bring me 3 treasures." The reason people get hurt while using reinforcement was due to their body being unable to handle the strain of magic. So the book explained why Zechs was injured the first time he tried the spell. He zoned out as Caroline shook him awake. The next day, Zechs got up early to try again, and Caroline woke up alone. He returned to the house to read Caroline a book, but would get more caught up in the content than she would, so he continued to slip away. But of course, Caroline grew frustrated, finding her brother gone and herself left alone. One time she even decided to take matters into her own hands, rushing out to the garden to find her Oni-sama. The gardener rushed up to her telling her it was not safe to be outside alone, but all she wanted was her big brother. Caroline returned to her oversized bedroom bored and alone. Where was he? Zechs was MIA, locked in as he attempted to perfect the body reinforcement skill. He took a branch and successfully managed to crumble it apart in his hands. The best he could manage now was doubling his strength, but he knew if he boosted the output even more he could smash rocks. Suddenly Zechs spotted some movement from the bushes. He turned to see Caroline looking upset. He walked up to her asking how long she had been there. Caroline went dark, assertively telling him she did not like his magic. Tears fell from her eyes and soon she was bawling. She begged her brother to never leave her again. Zechs began to wonder where his priorities were. He was doing this for her sake, but the result ended in her being upset. He began to worry that this would damage her trust in him, and if so, then all of this was pointless. Zechs bent down and apologized sincerely to her. He pulled her into a hug, explaining that she was the most important person to him, and that was something that would never change. Caroline looked up, knowing Zechs had given her his word. Her face soon lit up with her usual bright smile. Zechs took hold of her hand before she told him some news. She wanted to join him in his training. She was not scared of magic nor of getting hurt. Caroline told him she did not want him getting hurt, and Zechs immediately felt a sense of guilt. Caroline was not upset because she was bored or felt neglected, but because she was worried about him. So Zechs agreed that he would teach her. They began with the basics, the sphere spell. Caron held her hands out ready to start. With golden hair and red eyes, Caron's attributes were both light and fire. But in the game, she could not use her light magic despite her affinity. Light magic users were rare to begin with, and unlike other attributes, having the affinity alone was not enough to activate it. The key condition was rumored to be a heart that cares for others, which Zechs thought was quite vague anyway. But he knew that if that was really the condition, then was not Caron already beyond qualified? She got the hang of the lessons fast, and Zechs petted her head. If Caron truly awakened the light magic, the royal family and various powers in the country would surely take notice. And Zechs knew he could not put his sister in danger. The two continued to grow steadily regardless. And just as Zechs began to see things take a positive turn, a new maid started at the house. She was instructed to take care of both children. The maid was called Sion Shuhero, and more importantly, she was a spy. Sion was sent to the household on the back of her first mission. Her boss explained that the client was the Holy Royal Family. Sion was pleased that a girl like her, a troublesome outcast, was now finally of use. She was told to serve with pride, knowing she would fulfill the duties of the family and be honored to devote herself to them. So she set off on her way, bags in hand. When she arrived at the household, she was instructed to introduce herself to the children. She explained to them that starting from today, she would be responsible for taking care of them. She first told the kids that the room seemed a bit warm and decided to go and open a window. But on her way, she tripped and fell flat on her face. When she got up, she opened the window and told the kids she would wait outside. When she stepped out, Sion remembered the target, Caroline. Her mission was to monitor her closely, and the moment she showed any signs of awakening light magic, she must report it to the homeland immediately. There was a creak, and the door opened. Zechs had wandered out with Caroline behind him. When Sion asked what the matter was, he told her Caroline was going to the restroom. Sion bowed, letting him know she understood. But Zechs turned around to see the new maid was following them there. She told them it was part of her job to stay around. Sion's close surveillance did not end there. She scolded Caroline for informally addressing Zechs. Caroline looked at Zechs in confusion, but he too knew it was time for her to start her etiquette training. He instructed her to call him Oni-sama. She repeated after him and he hugged her. From afar, Sion was surprised at how close Zechs and Caroline were. It was rare for noble children to be this warm to one another. Sion thought to herself that though her role had expanded from mere surveillance to directly serving them, it was convenient for keeping a constant watch on Caroline. But Zechs also kept a close eye on Sion, as he watched her perform a spell, releasing a bird from her hands. That evening, Sion served the children rose cookies for their afternoon tea. Caroline asked in childlike gibberish if the roses were from the garden. Sion corrected her on the proper way of asking. She told Caroline she would ask later where the roses were from. Zechs tried to take over pouring the tea, but Sion insisted it was part of her job. She laid out the tea, which ended up spilled and messy. Later that evening, Sion set out to get more information from the servants about Caroline. So in the servants' quarters, she returned the dishes and offered to wash them. The cook smiled and accepted her offer. While she was there, the cooks asked if she was the new maid. Sion nodded, and they asked what made her want to work in the house. The servants brought up how the next head of the family was colorless, and everyone knew this house was doomed to fall. So as a result, only someone with baggage would agree to work for the house. Sion told them she was hired through a proper introduction letter, her background perfectly clear. She continued to say that Caroline had golden hair and the light attribute, so she at least was promising. The cooks agreed. They told Sion that even though Caroline's brother was colorless, she clearly adored him. Sion mentioned how the lady was curious if today's rose jam came from the estate's garden. She washed the plate but accidentally shattered it as she spoke. But the cooks were pleased Caroline had asked and even suggested making rose candies next time. They clearly adored her, presumably because she could be the next saint. They asked Sion if she was done washing and said they would put the plates away. When she walked away, the cooks were left staring at the broken plates in the sink. There was a knock on the door and Caroline looked up excited. Sion had brought dinner. Again, Zechs insisted that he could take care of things, but Sion offered to help Caroline with her meal. Caroline said no, that she wanted to eat by herself. Sion corrected her, telling her to say, "I can eat on my own." Zechs encouraged Caroline, making her smile. But that did not stop her from throwing one last side-eye in Sion's direction. Sion later brought Caroline a change of clothes, telling her she needed to get dressed. But as soon as Sion approached her, Caroline ran away, hiding behind Zechs' back. Zechs told Sion he would dress Caroline himself, but Sion told him her famous line, "But this is part of my job." Zechs smiled politely, telling her that he took care of Caron because he wanted to, so he would appreciate it if she did not interfere. Sion had to accept his offer. She wished the kids good night and headed off on her way. When she reached upstairs, she heard some voices gossiping about her. They wondered how long she would last in this house and that the first one was awful, how the maid thought Zechs was not even human and quit immediately. The servants agreed Zechs was quite an oddball, hearing him yell at a steward like a full-grown adult. They worried he was possessed. They continued to say that whenever they tried to dote on Caroline, Zechs always butted in. He totally changed his tone and attitude depending on who he was talking to, and it was not like they were getting paid extra to deal with that. To their surprise, Sion walked straight in, closing the door behind her. The gossiping maid suddenly changed the conversation, asking Sion if she was done with her shift, and also if working with Zechs was a challenge. They then mentioned how Zechs at least did everything for himself and Caroline independently, so Sion must have a lot of free time on her hands. They jokingly asked if she could share some of their workload. They continued to gossip about Zechs, wondering what the point was of being a noble if you were born colorless. Sion glanced at the two maids, not giving them anything. Eventually the maids agreed to go to sleep. When she was alone, Sion thought to herself if they were jealous. That girl's eyes were not filled with envy. She was evaluating if she was useful to her and Caron. She knew there was no need to get emotional or sentimental. If she wanted to get close to Lady Caroline, she would need to stay wary of Zechs. The story took a turn as we see a child running for her life, a collection of insults thrown at her. She was told not to even show her face. Their family once lost a political battle and was exiled from their homeland. It was only because the royal family of this holy kingdom took them in that they now lived in prosperity. She was told to offer everything, her eyes, her ears, her body, to the royal family. And even a failure like herself could at least provide something. So that was what it took. If she died for the sake of her family, would her father finally acknowledge her? The following day, Zechs told Sion that she really did not need to look after him and Caroline so much. But once again, Sion told him it was her job. And since she was being paid properly, it was only right that she did her part. She told Caroline to get dressed, but Caroline moaned that she wanted her brother to help her. Sion asked her if she was really letting Zechs perform a servant's duty. She reminded Caroline that properly assigning work to her staff was part of being a lady. Caroline clung on to Zechs, but he encouraged her, telling her she was growing into a young lady he could brag about. Caroline was determined to impress her brother, so she promised him she would do her best. So Caroline mastered her etiquette and manners classes, working hard to get herself up to scratch. She and Sion went into the garden, and Caroline asked him to race her. Zechs worked out that it was about time. Even if Caroline was his sister, it would not be right if they did not start setting some boundaries. He told Sion he would be counting on her from now on. Sion smiled as she watched him chase after his sister. Sion wondered if she had finally earned Zechs' trust. She took a breath, reflecting on the role she needed to play every day. The job really had taken her by surprise. She watched over Zechs and Caroline as they embraced. Winter fell and the three continued to wander outside for some fresh air. Caroline told Zechs there was a bunny in the bush. Sion took a look to see that the rabbit looked quite odd with a horn and sharp teeth. Suddenly she rushed towards Caroline, who had held her hands out to try and pet the rabbit. She picked him up and cuddled him. His eyes were red, just like hers. Zechs smiled, calling Caroline's eyes beautiful. Sion sighed, watching the rabbit relax in Caroline's arms. She wrote in her periodic report that there was no progress regarding the subject's magic abilities. She told herself that this did not qualify as concealment, so it was better not to report uncertain variables. She released the bird once again, who was presumably carrying the letter. Sion thought about Caroline's interaction with the rabbit and how it seemed to suddenly relax. Could that be a trace of light magic? Zechs and Caroline played in the bed of flowers as Caroline counted up to 6. She told Zechs that was what he taught her. Zechs told her that magic was said to be all about feeling, but unless you truly understood how it worked, you could not cast it properly, or so he believed. Sion watched the interaction unfold and thought to herself how Zechs could not even sense magic himself, yet he was so devoted to teaching his sister. All Sion could think of was how much Zechs must treasure Caroline. But how, as a child, was he not jealous of Caroline's potential? But she was still just a child. She watched Caroline try the magic over and over until suddenly she got the hang of it. A flash appeared in her palms. Sion could tell immediately that Caroline had generated a magic light orb. She ran to report it immediately, knowing that if she sent this intel, Caroline would surely be summoned to the palace. Caroline smiled, thrilled that she did it. Sion could not help but look back. She knew that this meant the siblings would be separated, but she did have a duty. In the house, Sion was called over by Zechs. He told her that after Caron was asleep, he needed to have a word with her. So later that night, Zechs led Sion out of the house, and she asked him what all this was about. She felt something was going on immediately. Zechs turned around and told Sion that he knew she was a spy from the royal palace. Sion did not see that one coming. She tried to speak but began to stutter as if it could not be more obvious that she was caught off guard. Zechs took it as confirmation, asking her if she had reported yet that Caron could use magic. He told her that if she kept it quiet, he would keep her spying a secret too. Sion blurted that she could not. In fact, she swore loyalty to the Holy Royal family. But suddenly Zechs snapped his fingers and 2 elf ears grew from Sion's human ears. Her cover had seriously been blown. Zechs had dispelled Sion's disguise magic, and he told her that if she did not agree to what he just said, he would make her identity public. That would create a lot of trouble for Sion, considering the royal family had hired a member of their rival family. The citizens supposedly had a deep hatred for elves. Sion told him that if this secret was exposed, the kingdom would be thrown into chaos. But Zechs did not care about that, as long as Caron was safe. He told Sion it would be her shaking the country, as the one who swore loyalty to the Holy Royal family was her. He asked her again if she accepted his offer. Sion had no choice but to bow. She told him she did. Zechs did not stop there, however. He ordered her not to disclose any information about the Forna siblings without his permission. Zechs created a swirl around her head, and she could only wonder what he was doing. Zechs continued to declare that Forna prioritized the contract and would not speak of Sion's secret, so at least the contract benefited both of them. When he was done, he walked away, telling Sion he was looking forward to working with her. He walked away like a legend, leaving Sion shaken to her core. Sion quickly used concealment on her elf ears. She had been trained as a spy, and the most important lesson was not to let emotions shake her. So what exactly had just happened? Not to mention the contract magic and the spell that broke her disguise. A child casting magic that she had never even heard of. Who was this kid? The following day, Zechs called for some more magic practice now that Sion had sworn to secrecy. Caron looked to see Sion watching her, feeling apprehensive since their magic classes usually only included herself and Zechs. But Zechs smiled, telling her not to worry. Sion was staying this time. He asked Caron to try and use light magic. Caron looked at him sassily, saying she couldn't use it yet, but she did ask if light magic could heal and purify curses. If that was the case, she would be happy to try and master it someday. Zechs laughed and petted her head. He turned to Sion, telling her that he had already told Caron not to mention her skills to anyone, so if anything came up, Sion could help too, as long as she didn't tell anyone either. But Caron reminded Zechs that he had said this magic would just be a secret between the two of them. She worried that if more people found out, bad people might take her away, and she would be separated from Zechs. Zechs turned to her and explained that he had already thought everything through, and on this occasion it was okay to share. He asked Caroline if there was ever a time when he made the wrong call. She looked down stubbornly but eventually said no. Zechs turned to Sion with a smile, asking her if that was a bit petty of him. But Sion reminded him that she had sworn not to betray Zechs. Zechs then asked Sion what she had been taught about being colorless. Sion told him that she was taught it was a useless trait with no unique magic. Caroline shouted at Sion for saying such cruel words. She already knew her brother was colorless and she wasn't about to let anyone insult him. But Zechs told Caroline it was fine. In fact, that was exactly how society viewed colorless people, and Sion was just repeating a common belief. Caroline looked down, trying to calm herself. Zechs explained that what he used was non-attribute magic. Usually, people manifest magic by transforming their mana into element-based spells. But non-attribute magic uses mana as it is, raw energy without changing its form. This was a principle Sion had never heard of. Zechs smiled, saying he was planning on using it. If someone had no mana, then sure, it would be hopeless. But being colorless meant your mana wasn't tied to any element, you simply had it. Zechs explained that he had tried to create some spells. He took Sion's hands and performed Pure Joy. Suddenly, Sion's chest felt warm, her heart thumping. Zechs explained that he had cast a type of mental magic on her. Since he couldn't manifest spells externally, he figured he could directly send his mana into someone and trigger the effect inside them. That experiment led to emotional manipulation magic. The time when Sion suddenly got emotional was a result of his spell, which was designed to release her emotions. Of course, depending on how it was used, it had the potential to be a dangerously powerful kind of magic. Zechs explained that he had developed more than just mental magic, but he would save the rest for later. He asked Sion to keep his skills a secret too, and she accepted once again. By this time, however, Caroline was getting jealous. She asked Zechs to hold her hand too. So Zechs let go of Sion's and embraced Caroline, who was still worried about how close Sion was getting to her brother. Back in the house, Zechs read through a book. He realized that he would be turning 5 soon, so it was about time he learned more about the world. Of course, if Caroline found out, she would want to join him on his adventures, and he couldn't take her anywhere unless he knew for certain that it was safe. He asked Sion if Caron was back yet, and she told him her lecture still had some time left. Caroline rushed through the corridor trying to find her big brother. She looked all over the household but couldn't find him anywhere. Sion asked Caron what was wrong. Meanwhile, a little boy with dark hair and glasses roamed around the streets freely for the first time. He was surprised that the main street looked quite nice, but he knew that walking into an upscale shop with the way he currently looked was not ideal. The side alley didn't look too safe either. The boy couldn't tell if the food was cheap or pricey, so he decided that he would ask Sion about it later. The kid heard some noise and turned to see other children his age playing. There were no parents in sight, so he knew it must be safe enough for children to play alone. The boy wondered if a dad might actually be doing his job perhaps. But then again, it was probably just a competent steward. The boy wanted to try out the street food next time, but he needed to figure out the money part first. Asking the steward would look way too suspicious. Zechs appeared behind Sion, and Caroline was far from impressed. She asked where her brother was. The little boy smiled, saying that he was here. But Caroline knew this kid was not Zechs. She would know immediately if it was him, much cooler and more elegant, and just looking at him should make her feel all warm and floaty inside. She was really talking about her own brother like he was her Prince Charming or something. Caroline knew that this kid was an imposter, and she pointed at him. Sion scolded her for pointing, but Caroline needed to know what was going on. She told Sion it was okay, but she needed an explanation. Sion eventually gave in and told Caroline the little boy was a doppelganger, created using her disguise magic and Zechs' mental and magical combination techniques. The boy was used to allow Zechs to leave the household. Caroline flatly asked why. Why Zechs was not around to tell her instead of Sion. She knew he was doing something secret again, and told Sion that ever since she came here, it had been nothing but change and more secrets. She asked them if she wasn't good enough. Zechs was all she had, and she hated the thought of someone taking him away from her. Sion told Caroline that she came here as a spy to watch Caroline, and her actions weren't restricted, but she was under a magical contract with Zechs, one that prevented her from making statements harmful to him. Sion said that Zechs wasn't keeping her chained. He kept her nearby so he could monitor her. Eventually, Caroline apologized. She bowed her head ashamed, telling Sion that no one wants to openly admit that they did something wrong, and yet she did. But Sion stopped her there, telling Caroline that how she felt was natural. Caroline told Sion that she thinks Zechs does trust her now, at least a little. Well, she was bound under his magical contract after all. Sion asked Caroline if she thought so, and Caroline said yes. She knew Zechs very well. When the real Zechs returned, he asked Sion if Caroline really figured the doppelganger out. Sion said that the moment she looked at him, she knew that wasn't her brother. No one else noticed a thing. Zechs said that maybe those with high mana, like knights, warriors, and spies, were able to sense something was different. In that case, he would need to keep refining the doppelganger spell. He told Sion he would need her help, and she obediently agreed. Zechs then asked how Caroline reacted when she noticed Zechs had gone. Sion told him that she was waiting for his return the entire time, but Zechs wanted to hear what Sion really thought of the matter. Sion eventually told him that she thought Caroline was overly dependent on him. In this manner, aside from him, there was no one older than Caron of higher standing. So naturally, that warped her relationships with others. Caroline developed a need for Zechs' approval because she had no one else to treat as equal. Zechs admitted that he had been choosing who to trust and controlling her interactions on purpose. That said, he seriously doubted that their parents would ever go out of their way to arrange playdates with other noble children. So Zechs decided to create a doppelganger for Caron too. Caron saw the girl and told him it looked nothing like her, but the doppelganger said exactly the same. Zechs managed to develop the spell, placing pieces of their minds into them. But when Caroline tried to hold her doppelganger's hand, she noticed that her hand went straight through. Zechs explained that they didn't have a physical body, just a mass of mana he shaped. pure mana was just like light where you couldn't touch it. So the two left Sion alone to babysit the doppelgangers, transforming into their own disguises. Zechs transformed into the same little boy he was before, and Caron into a little girl with similar brown hair and green eyes. Zechs explained that with this disguise, no one would recognize them as noble children. Caroline smiled, super excited for her new formation. Caroline and Zechs played a game of hide-and-seek in the streets, with Zechs on his way to find his sister. He stretched out, deciding that he wasn't answering, as that was a smart move for little kids. Honestly, if he used detection magic, he could have found all of them in an instant. The detection spell created was a non-elemental magic that sent out waves of mana to sense others' magic nearby. After all, every human has at least a little mana. He huffed as he set off on his way. That said, using it would be childish. The whole point was to find them with his own eyes and feet. A little boy appeared in the bushes, and Zechs had his first target. Another boy was then found behind a statue, and finally a girl elsewhere. They had no idea how Zechs was so good at this game. Zechs gave them an evil laugh, telling them that back in the day he was called the god of tag, so this was nothing for him. But there were still two people left to find, Caron and Miria. Suddenly, Zechs had a feeling of dread, and then he realized that it was Caron's magic, the emergency signal he told her to use for worst-case scenarios. He sprinted into an alleyway to perform a detection spell before heading deeper into the town. He used his body reinforcement spell to bounce to the rooftops, knowing that he would get to her faster. Caron was with Dan and Miria, and the one separated was Terra. Zechs sprinted but identified 3 mana sources close by too. He looked down to see a gang of men with their hands around Caron's mouth. Zechs freaked out, but he needed to stop himself from charging in too recklessly in case the men took someone hostage before he could knock all of them out. He had to think quickly, watching Caron get tied up. So he stayed put, seeing Miss Terra screaming at the men to release her brother. The man howled before trying to abduct Miss Terra too. Zechs jumped from the rooftop and landed on his feet, but he needed to leap again. He decided to compress mana under his foot to form a platform, and just like that, Zechs was free-falling. Zechs landed and went straight in for the gang of men. Despite being half their height, he knocked out the first guy and went sprinting for the second, who managed to dodge him. Even after using 5 body enhancements, it was still only a 4-year-old's strength being raised 5 times. He kicked the guy, but soon he was held upside down by his feet. Could he really not win against a grown man with martial arts experience? Maybe it was a mistake not to train for combat just because he was a child. Either way, he knew he needed to think fast before the other men he knocked out started to wake up. Zechs suddenly felt something super hot, and when he looked up, the man was on fire. Caron had come to rescue him. Zechs finally broke free from the man's grip and attacked him from behind. The man cried for help, his clothes still on fire. Once the man was restrained, Zechs decided to douse the fire out of pity, although he would not be able to save the man's hair or his pride. Once Zechs had sorted the man out, he rushed to Dan, who was seriously injured with a bleeding head. The kids cried for help, noticing the bleeding was not stopping. Zechs held his hand out to perform his concealment, and a man looked out of his window, wondering what all the racket was. But when he looked down, the streets were empty. Zechs had made them all invisible to the public. Caron took hold of Dan's hand, and his sister asked what she was doing. It seemed like she was performing a type of healing spell on him, and in no time Dan's wounds had vanished, and he murmured awake. Caron told him that everything was fine now, as Dan scrambled to sit up. He couldn't believe he was on death's door just a minute ago. His sister ran to embrace him, equally afraid that he would die in her arms. When the siblings looked up, they noticed the Caron they knew had completely transformed. She had golden hair now, and the siblings instantly recognized her as a saint. They also noticed that Zechs had transformed from the little boy with mousy brown hair and glasses. Caron and Zechs walked home, defeated by the day they had. Zechs turned to Caron and gave her a massive hug. She apologized to him, telling him that she broke their promise and had misbehaved. She begged him not to hate her, but Zechs told Caron it was his fault. He didn't make it in time to save her and felt super guilty for that. But Caron quickly told him that wasn't true. She believed that he would come no matter what. More importantly, she wanted to know if she was able to help him. Zechs looked at Caron's hands and saw they were red and burned. She insisted she was fine, saying it was just from using fire magic to burn the ropes. Zechs told her that she helped a lot and, most importantly, saved Dan. Caron was still caught up on how she broke the promise, though. But Zechs asked her if he had stopped her. Would she have left Dan alone to die? She said no, and Zechs told her that was the real quality of a saint. He promised Caron he would always protect her, and there was no need to apologize. Besides, Caron would most definitely do the same for him. Caron smiled, reassuring her brother that it was true. If she was in trouble, he would help her out, and Shade would do the same. She rode on Zechs' back, and they both agreed to have a fresh start. Zechs was proud of Caron and how she was growing up to be a great girl. He hoped she would have the chance to grow up peacefully. It had been a week since Caron and the others were attacked by the gang, but fortunately that was the last of the drama. Zechs made sure that Dan and the others kept quiet, and since they had saved their lives, they agreed not to tell anyone. Dan mentioned that he would tell everyone Caron couldn't use light magic, but his sister smacked him for his idiotic suggestion. Zechs had to put a decent amount of pressure on them to keep Caron's light magic a secret. And after that, they found a new place in town. Zechs, Sion, and Caron walked around the sketchy area as a drunk man harassed them. He couldn't believe he was the one who couldn't say no, but Caron told Zechs she needed to understand how people lived, as nobles. She was on a mission to improve the lives of the people, and as a daughter of the Forlana family, it was her duty to go with Zechs. Zechs knew he couldn't say no to his sister's wishes, so she joined them. They approached a hooded man, Shintu, who snarled at them for staring. He added that this place was no playground for kids. Sion asked him what he was talking about, and Zechs had to calm her down. There was no mistake. This man might sound harsh, but he was only concerned for them, which was why Zechs decided he was the right person to speak to. The man's name was Portable, and he was the one keeping order in this slum on the edge of Forlana's capital. Zechs bent down to speak to the man, telling him he might find it absurd that a kid was saying this, but he was here to negotiate with him. Zechs introduced himself as the son of the Forlana Lord. He introduced Caron as his sister and Sion as her maid. The man asked what exactly Zechs wanted to negotiate. Zechs explained that recently some shady individuals had infiltrated the city, and even if they were caught, there was a chance more would appear. Zechs told the man that he believed those kinds of people tended to hide here, and since the man was in charge, if anyone could sniff them out, it would be him. The man asked Zechs what he was planning to do once they were rounded up, mentioning that the royals had once done something to people like him. Zechs stayed calm, telling the man he simply wanted to get rid of intruders and restore public order. The man shouted that Zechs probably wanted to wipe out the slums while he was at it, saying he didn't want to help anyone who would put his people at risk. He told them to get lost, but Caron quickly stepped forward. She called the man her uncle and asked him to lend her brother his strength. She explained that it was her first time going into town and that she had made friends, but she almost never got to see them again. She told the man that although she was protected, her friends were not, and she didn't want to see them hurt again, nor did she want to see anyone else in this city get hurt. She put her hands together and told him she would do anything she could. Caron begged the man to help them. The man couldn't believe his eyes. A noble girl kneeling on the ground and bowing her head to him. It was something he had never seen before. Zechs added that he would be happy to increase patrols, and if the man just gave them the information, they would handle the rest. And of course, they wouldn't hurt anyone from the slums. The man looked down and Sion passed Zechs a bag filled with coins. He told the man they weren't asking for free help and would be happy to offer him the same amount of money monthly. The man jumped to his feet, clearly money motivated. He agreed that he would help, and Caron thanked Uncle for accepting the job, taking his hand. On the way back, Sion asked Zechs if he could really trust this man, since anyone who works for gold can be swayed by gold just as easily. Zechs knew that what Sion was saying was true. Even if someone wanted to agree with their proposal, their old values might stop them from being loyal. Sion asked if he thought so, and Zechs reminded her that his magic reads emotions, so he was sure of it. He asked Caroline if she was scared of him, but Caroline told Zechs that he was her big brother, so she could never be afraid of him. Sion, on the other hand, was terrified of Zechs. I mean, who wouldn't be? Zechs spent his days making the most of his skills. He approached a prisoner, instantly reading his crimes: theft, kidnapping, even attempted murder. Everything was already confirmed, and he reminded the man that crimes like that carried a death penalty in this territory. When it came to Zechs' mental magic, strengthening spells were one thing, but weakening spells could physically harm people. Zechs couldn't test them on normal folks, so he barely progressed, but now he could put them to good use. After what happened, Zechs couldn't guarantee Caron's safety anymore. He would never forgive himself if his hesitation to get his hands dirty led to someone getting hurt. The man begged him to stop, and Zechs knew this wasn't humane, but his top priority was Caroline's survival. After Caroline was kidnapped, he was forced to realize how little power he really had, so he moved quickly to take control of the Count's household. By gaining influence over the central figures, Zechs was able to get a grip on Fornada's internal affairs, and he discovered something alarming. He learned about it 3 days ago on his 6th birthday. The butler mentioned something about adoption. In the Holy Kingdom, nobles were bound by several legal obligations. One of them stated that within 10 years of inheriting a title, a noble must father up to 2 male heirs. The higher a fetus's magical power, the more likely the mother would die in childbirth. And since nobles tend to have high magic capacity, polygamy became the norm. But of course, this household only had 2 children. Zechs spotted Caron in the garden and waved to her. She was cheerful and completely oblivious to the important discussion happening in the office. Zechs asked the butler if there had been any word about his mother being pregnant, and the butler told him that he hadn't heard anything. Zechs asked when his father inherited the title, and the butler told him 9 years ago. This was not good news. Not only could they lose the house, but they could be exiled as criminals by association. The Fornada line was registered under the fire bloodline. Zechs had no magic attribute, but magical tools confirmed he carried the bloodline's power. He asked the butler if the child was adopted. Would it still count towards the requirement? The butler responded that only the eldest son must be blood-related, but for the second son, adoption was an option. Zechs asked what would happen if the eldest son died, and the butler told him that in that case, the family line could officially be overwritten under special circumstances. So by this law, it was possible to hijack a noble family. That in itself sounded familiar to Zechs. The butler told him that they had received an offer from a baron's family to adopt their son. Zechs read through the papers and his face dropped. He reassured the butler that he was fine, but instructed him to go forward with the adoption. It read, Orca Falgata Yunan Byakudai. He was one of the romance options in this game, and in his route he was the sworn enemy who takes over the family. His family was part of the Beastkin race. Although the Holy Kingdom was a constitutional monarchy ruled by the Holy Royal Family, it was also a religious state. There were two main religious factions: the monotheists, who worshipped the human god as the supreme deity with other gods and their races beneath him, and the polytheists, who believed all gods were equally divine. And what happens when those beliefs clash? Racial discrimination was the answer. If the human god was on top, then humans must be superior. That toxic idea ran rampant in the monotheist faction. The current royal family was polytheist, so open persecution didn't happen much, but Beastkin nobles still had to tread carefully. One misstep, and they would fall from grace. And that's exactly what happened to Orca's family, the Byakudai Baron House. They sensed an impending civil war and tried to save their youngest child by sending him away as an adoptee. The butler announced that Orca had arrived. Zechs told him to show their guest to the parlor, saying he would be there immediately. At the moment, he was in the garden picking flowers with Caron. 1 year from now, that baronial house would fall to civil unrest. Most of them would be slaughtered or sold into slavery, just like in the game's original timeline. Zechs knew he needed to stay vigilant. Orca introduced himself to Zechs, saying it was an honor to meet him and that he would be the newest member of the family. He gave his full name, Orca Falgata Yunan. He seemed pretty cute, with a small face and animal ears. Zechs had known what to expect, but seeing him in person was something else entirely. If the game's version held true, he would barely grow taller than this. A boy this adorable could seriously mess with your morals. Not to mention, in the original story, they tormented this kid. What kind of villains were they supposed to be? Zechs apologized for spacing out, then introduced himself properly. Caroline did the same. They told Orca that since they were family now, there was no need for formality and that he could relax around them. Orca accepted and thanked them both, though his nervousness was obvious. Zechs knew that if they were entering Orca's route, they really needed to bond with him early on. He asked Orca if he'd like a tour around the estate to begin with. Orca apologized, saying the long journey had left him exhausted. The butler stepped in and offered to escort him to his room. Zechs waved him off, though he couldn't shake the worry that this might be tougher than he'd imagined. And Zechs was right to worry. Days passed, and Orca spent most of his time locked in his room. Whenever he did appear, he would rush back inside if anyone noticed him. Given the circumstances of his arrival, they allowed him space for a week, but maybe it was time to help him integrate into the family. After all, their future depended on getting close to him. So Zechs arranged a small tea party for just the four of them: himself, Orca, Caroline, and Sion. He planned to hold it in the garden and made sure there were plenty of treats to help ease the tension. The tea party began, and it was awkward. Caron sipped her tea while Orca couldn't even make eye contact. Of course, Zechs had expected this. Orca had been like this since day one. Caroline, on the other hand, was simply happy to be at a tea party with her big brother. But seeing Orca there didn't exactly thrill her. Sion whispered to Zechs, suggesting that he try starting a conversation. Zechs told Orca that this tea party was meant for all the siblings to bond, so everyone should just relax. But Caroline frowned, saying she didn't recall hearing that this was supposed to be a bonding event. Zechs admitted that was his fault, but since they were all here now, they should use the opportunity to get to know one another. After all, they needed to support each other as family. Caroline replied that she was perfectly content serving Zechs. Zechs could not imagine things going any worse. He told Caroline not to be so standoffish, especially since Orca was in a difficult position. He then turned to Orca, reassuring him that Caroline was actually a kind person. Orca could barely speak, while Caroline shot him sharp looks across the table. Zechs sighed inwardly. His first family tea party had completely backfired. Zechs used his detection skills to sneak through the forest. He pulled out a dagger when he sensed something nearby. A snake appeared from the bushes about to strike, but Zechs dealt with it before it could harm him. The next target was 100 meters ahead at 2 o'clock. As for why he was hunting magical beasts in game terms, it was for grinding and building real combat experience with non-elemental magic. This world did not have levels, but it was common knowledge that defeating magical beasts improved one's abilities. A magical beast was an animal that had accumulated ambient mana from the air and evolved into something far more vicious, and generally speaking, more hostile to humankind. Some said that a slain beast's excess mana was absorbed by the victor, though no one had truly proved it. For ordinary folks, subjugation was difficult, so knights and adventurers took commissions. But it was an easier way to get stronger than simple training, which was why monster hunts were sometimes part of the academy curriculum. Zechs thought that if that was the case, then why not start early? He looked up to see the sun already setting. Zechs decided to try one last target. He pointed his finger to the sky and shot down a bird. He was proud, but each shot burned through nearly all the mana in his body. It was probably a mana control issue, and he still had a long way to go. Sion came and suggested they head back. Orca and Caroline still wouldn't open up to one another, and Caron was even more of a brocon than Zechs expected. Orca's rejection also seemed to run deeper than he assumed, and now he was stumped. Sion asked Zechs if she could have a moment, and Zechs asked what was wrong. Sion admitted that she had noticed he was quite stressed today, and Zechs understood that Sion was genuinely worried about him. He was surprised, considering he had bound her with an oath spell. So what was her real aim? Zechs explained that he was worried about Orca and Caroline, and he needed to find a way to bridge the gap between them. Sion suggested that Zechs start by talking to them individually instead. It was only natural with Lord Orca, but since his arrival at Forenata, hadn't Zechs also avoided spending one-on-one time with Caroline? Sion told him that he might hear what was truly in her heart. She recommended that he first create time just for the two of them. Zechs thanked her for the idea. Sion looked down, telling him to think nothing of it. But Zechs couldn't help thinking that all this with Sion was one big gamble. The oath he put on her did not cover Orca, and right now she could use that loophole to pass intel to her employer. Of course, that would end very badly for the siblings, so depending on her next moves, Zechs decided he might need to rethink how he dealt with her. But first, he needed to focus on Caron. Caron was invited to Zechs' room, and he thanked her for coming, telling her to take a seat. After Zechs' 5th birthday, he and Caroline were split into 2 different rooms. Of course, a boy and a girl couldn't share a room together. Caroline did not take too well to the new arrangements, throwing a fit, but at least she was honest about it. Zechs asked her what was wrong, and Caroline reluctantly asked if Orca was joining them today. To her surprise, Zechs apologized. He told her he hadn't noticed that they hadn't had any time alone lately. But Caroline told him not to apologize, it was her fault for being too stubborn. But Zechs told her again that this was on him. He admitted to pushing her too hard to befriend Orca without thinking about how she would feel about it. He sighed, feeling like a lousy big brother. But Caroline told him that he was not failing at all. He was her number one, and she accepted his apology. Caroline admitted she behaved the same way when Sion first joined them. She was too young to understand then, but now she did, and she was nothing but jealous. She hated seeing her brother's attention go elsewhere. Watching him worry so much made her anxious, how one day her big brother would become someone else's. Caroline worried that she would be the one left behind, and she began to sob. Zechs walked toward her, embracing her in a hug. He told her that he was sorry for making her worry like that. From here on, as nobles and as people, more ties and obligations would pile up, but things between them would never change. The first person in his heart was Caroline. He explained that there would come a time when Caroline might feel jealous again, but if she did, she needed to remember that the one he treasured the most was her. Caroline smiled, telling Zechs she understood. She asked him to hold her like this again if she ever got jealous, so they met with Orca soon after, and he was literally shaking this time. Zechs handed him some tea, suggesting it would help him relax. Orca took the tea and gulped it, looking slightly better by the time he finished. Zechs asked if he liked the tea, and Orca agreed. So Zechs passed him some more, and Orca even offered to pour the tea for him. He was pleased that Orca liked his blend. Brewing tea was actually a hobby of his since his past life. He even had a few certifications. Orca couldn't believe it, and Zechs asked why that was surprising. But this put Orca even more on edge. He told Zechs to forgive him, as he never meant to belittle his interests. Zechs forgave him with a laugh. Orca explained that he was just shocked, as Zechs was nothing like the image he had of a high noble's son. Zechs told him not to worry, that he was quite chill and didn't mind if Orca spoke his mind. Orca looked down, saying that he found high nobles to be arrogant. They toyed with others and bullied those beneath them for fun. Zechs recognized what Orca was saying. That was definitely the case in the game. In this world, high nobles treated commoners like tools. Even those just below them got trampled. Someone's misfortune was sweet as honey, and someone's happiness was something they set out to crush. In the original story, Zechs and his sister tormented Orca, their adopted brother, like he was nothing but a punching bag. That trauma left him withdrawn until the heroine, the saint, slowly healed him, and eventually overcame the Forenata family and took him away. That was the full outline of Orca's route. Odds were, even back at the Byakudai barony, Orca was already being harassed by kids from rival factions, so there was no surprise in him being wary of Caroline and Zechs. Zechs called for Orca and told him he understood that it might be hard for him to believe right now, but the Forenata family was on his side, and they wouldn't betray him. He told Orca that Caron and he would always stand by him. Even if he couldn't believe that yet, he should at least stay involved. Nothing starts if they know nothing. Even if it was just to keep watch on them, that was fine. He went on to say that he would like for them to be a real family, but Orca should move at his own pace. Eventually Orca agreed, and Zechs knew that was enough for today. He believed that if they kept building contact with one another, Orca was bound to open his heart up and interact with them. As he walked out of Zechs' room, Zechs waved, but Orca sprinted away like a caged animal. Zechs decided to join in on some official training. He watched men spar and battle with one another. The instructor let him know that skills aren't mastered overnight, but ever since Zechs started watching over them, everyone had been training seriously. Zechs smiled and told the instructor that was true. When he saw them relaxing and playing cards, he almost lost it. The instructor told him he was grateful Zechs chose leniency then. Zechs watched the men, noticing that their armor and swords were all beaten up. He made a mental note to look into replacements, but unfortunately money was tight in the household currently. He spotted Orca dashing around the corridors and called his name. He told Orca that he didn't need to be so formal with him before asking if he was on his way to history class. Orca said that was right, and Zechs gave him a heads up that Caron would be attending too. But of course, if Orca wasn't comfortable, he would be happy to arrange a private tutor for him. Orca bowed, telling him that he didn't deserve such treatment. He bowed to Zechs again, saying he would be late for class. During the lesson, Orca was asked to name 3 achievements of the Third Holy King. Orca began to say flood control but couldn't list anymore. He bowed his head, ashamed. Caron was asked next and she answered perfectly, adding that this king carried out many reforms for the people. She was applauded by her teacher and shot a glance at Orca. She knew that he did know the answer. Orca admitted she was right, but he didn't want to speak out of turn, especially not ahead of Caron. Caron told him that wasn't what she meant, and Orca apologized. Meanwhile, the tutor placed the report on Zechs' desk and told her she could leave. He sighed, telling the butler that raising kids was pretty tough. Caron was being difficult once again today, and Orca wasn't looking much better either. He never said anything about himself. Caroline stepped into the garden and came across the landscaper, telling him he was working hard. The man told her that he was mixing fertilizer into the soil and would plant something once it settled. He asked her if she had any flowers she liked, and she told him any would be fine, as long as they were pale purple, just like Zechs' eyes. This made the landscaper chuckle. He told Caroline that it seemed like she truly adored Zechs. Caroline smiled, telling the landscaper she loved him more than anything in the world. She told him she would be looking forward to seeing the flowers bloom. As she walked deeper into the trees, she heard a voice. To her surprise, she found Orca in the bushes.